The gun barrel pressed cold against Clara's temple. Ezra Brennan smiled that same smile she'd seen the night he murdered a man in St. Louis. "You should have stayed in your boarding house, Miss Bennett," he whispered. "Now you'll die in Texas dirt, and Whitmore will watch." But this wasn't how her story began. 3 days earlier, Clara Bennett stood in a St. Louis boarding house holding a letter with 47 words that would change her life forever. The darkness pressed in from all sides. Clara's hands ached from gripping the worn leather valise. Behind her, the sound of horses grew closer. Each stumble on the rough terrain cost her precious seconds. The night was moonless, making every step treacherous. Behind her, the torches of her pursuers bobbed like demon eyes in the darkness. Ahead, only blackness and the fragile hope that Thornfield Station hadn't closed for the night. If the station was closed, Clara Bennett would die tonight, and Ezra Brennan would win. The story of how Clara Bennett came to be running for her life through the darkness of a Texas night in June of 1882 began 48 hours earlier in a boarding house room in St. Louis that smelled of mildew and desperation. Clara stood at the window of that narrow room, looking down at the muddy street 3 stories below. The rain had been falling for 2 days straight, turning the unpaved roads into rivers of filth. Carriages struggled through the muck. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The sound echoed off the brick buildings, hollow and lonely. She held a letter in her hands. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. 47 words that her mother had kept hidden in the bottom of an old cigar box tucked beneath pressed flowers and recipes written in shaking handwriting. "Dear Miss Bennett, I am a man of few words and fewer graces, but I am honest, and I will be good to you. The West is hard country, but there is beauty here if you know where to look. I have land, a sturdy house, in need of a companion. If you are willing to take a chance on a stranger, I will meet you at Thornfield Station on June 14th. Respectfully yours, Josiah Whitmore." Clara's mother had received this letter 3 years ago. She'd written back, explained she was too ill to travel, that she had a daughter to care for. The correspondence had ended there. But Margaret Bennett had kept the letter, and now Clara understood why. Her mother had known that someday Clara might need an escape route. That day had come. A knock at the door made Clara jump. She folded the letter quickly, tucked it into the pocket of her dress. "Miss Bennett." The landlady's voice was sharp as a knife blade. "Your rent is 3 weeks overdue. I need payment today, or you're out." Clara opened the door just wide enough to see Mrs. Kowalski's pinched face, her small eyes hard with suspicion. "I'm leaving today, Mrs. Kowalski. I've found employment elsewhere." "Where?" "Texas." The landlady's eyebrows rose. "Texas? You got family there? I have prospects." Mrs. Kowalski's expression shifted from suspicion to pity, which was somehow worse. "Girl like you running off to Texas alone? You know what happens to girls who do that?" Clara met her eyes steadily. "I know what happens to girls who stay here with no money and no family. That's worse." She closed the door before the landlady could respond. Her hands were shaking. What Mrs. Kowalski didn't know, what no one knew, was why Clara was really leaving. It wasn't just the rent. It wasn't just the poverty. 3 nights ago, Clara had been walking home late from the laundry. She'd taken a shortcut through the warehouse district, a mistake she'd never make again. Through a broken window, she'd seen them. 3 men in expensive suits, standing over a 4th man on his knees. She'd recognized one of the suits. Ezra Brennan, the land speculator everyone whispered about. The man who owned half the docks. She'd heard the gunshot, seen the 4th man fall, seen Brennan wipe his hands with a handkerchief, casual as if he'd just finished dinner. And then Brennan had looked up, looked directly at the window where Clara stood frozen. Their eyes met for 3 seconds. That was all. But it was enough. The next morning, 2 men came to the boarding house asking for her. Mrs. Kowalski told them Clara had gone to work. Clara had been hiding in her room, heart-hammering. That's when she'd remembered the letter, the 47 words tucked in her mother's things. Texas was far from St. Louis, far from Ezra Brennan and what she'd seen. She hoped it was far enough. The valise was already packed. Everything she owned in the world fit inside it. 2 dresses, both faded from washing. one wool shawl moth-eaten but warm. Her mother's herb journal pages, brittle with age, filled with careful drawings of plants and notes about their uses. A tintype photograph so faded the faces were barely visible, but Clara knew them anyway. Her mother young and smiling. Her father who died in a factory accident when Clara was 5. A stranger to her now, just a shadow in a frame. And the watch. Her grandmother's watch. Brass and heavy, the face yellowed but still keeping perfect time. The only thing of value Clara possessed, and the one thing she would never sell, no matter how hungry she got. She wound the watch carefully, listening to the familiar tick. Her mother had wound this watch every night before bed, right up until her hands grew too weak to turn the stem. Keep moving forward, Clara girl. The Lord helps those who help themselves. Clara picked up the valise and walked out of that room for the last time. The train station was chaos. Steam hissed from the locomotives. Porters shouted. Children cried. The smell of coal smoke and unwashed bodies was overwhelming. Clara pushed through the crowd, clutching her ticket, checking and rechecking the platform number. She couldn't afford to miss this train. There wouldn't be another chance. She found her seat in the third-class car, a wooden bench near the back. The woman next to her had 3 children, all under the age of 6. The youngest was crying a thin, reedy wail that set Clara's teeth on edge. But she said nothing. She had no right to complain. This was luxury compared to where she'd been. As the train pulled away from St. Louis, Clara pressed her face to the window and watched the city disappear. The brick buildings gave way to warehouses, then to scattered houses, then to empty fields. The rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds in golden shafts, illuminating the landscape like a promise. She pulled out her mother's journal and opened it to a random page. The handwriting was neat, precise. Each plant was drawn with careful detail. Mugwort for wounds and infections, yarrow for fever, dock for insect bites and rashes. Her mother had learned these things from her own mother, who'd learned them from hers. Knowledge passed down through generations of women who couldn't afford doctors, who had to make do with what grew in the woods and fields. Clara traced her finger over the drawing of yarrow, remembering her mother's voice. See these leaves, Clara girl lacy like a doily, and the flowers flat white clusters. You can make a tea from the leaves when you have a fever. Steep them in hot water until it turns pale gold. Those lessons had seemed pointless when her mother was alive. St. Louis had doctors, had pharmacies on every corner. But now, heading west into territory, she didn't know Clara was grateful for every scrap of knowledge her mother had given her. The train rattled on through the day and into the night. Clara dozed fitfully, her head bumping against the window with each lurch of the car. She dreamed of her mother's face, pale and drawn in those final weeks. The cough that wouldn't stop. The blood on the handkerchief. The way her mother's hand had gripped Clara's so tight it hurt, as if she could hold on to life through sheer force of will. When Clara woke, it was dawn. The landscape had changed. Gone were the green fields of Missouri. Now there was only brown grass stretching to the horizon, interrupted by occasional stands of trees. The sky was bigger here, impossibly vast. Clara had never seen so much sky in her life. The woman with the children had gotten off at some point during the night. Clara was alone on the bench now. She straightened her dress, smoothed her hair, tried to make herself presentable. First impressions mattered. Josiah Whitmore would be meeting her at the station, and she needed to look like a woman worth taking a chance on. But as the day wore on, doubt crept in. What if he took one look at her and changed his mind? What if the letter had been a mistake, a moment of loneliness that he regretted? What if he'd found someone else in the 3 years since writing to her mother? Stop it, Clara told herself firmly. Worry is wasted energy. You'll know soon enough. The train pulled into Thornfield Station just as the sun was setting. Clara gathered her valise and stepped down onto the platform. The air was different here. Dry, hot, even though it was evening. The smell of dust and sage filled her nose, so different from the coal smoke and river smell of St. Louis. The station was small, just a single building with a covered platform. A few other passengers got off the train, were met by family or friends, and quickly disappeared. Within minutes, Clara was alone on the platform, except for an old man in a station master's uniform. He was sitting on a bench, smoking a pipe. When he saw Clara standing there, valise in hand, looking around with growing uncertainty, he stood and walked over. "Help you, miss." Clara pulled out the letter, unfolded it carefully. "I'm looking for Josiah Whitmore. He was supposed to meet me here." The station master took the letter, squinted at it in the fading light. His fingers were stained with tobacco nails, cracked and dirty. "Whitmore, you say?" "Yes, that's what it says." He turned the paper over, held it up to catch the last rays of sunlight. "Josiah Whitmore. I know who that is. Everybody in these parts knows the Whitmore name. Owns Cottonwood Ranch, biggest spread between here and the territorial line." Clara's heart lifted, then sank when she saw his expression. "But I ain't seen nobody from Cottonwood Ranch come through today. Not yesterday neither." He handed the letter back. Something in his eyes looked almost like pity. "You sure you got the right day?" Clara unfolded the letter again, read the date for the 100th time. June 14th. She pulled her grandmother's watch from her pocket, checked the date window. June 14th. She'd counted the days on the train like a child counting to Christmas. "I'm sure." The station master shrugged the slow, heavy shrug of a man who'd seen too many disappointed faces on this platform. "Could be he got held up. Ranch work don't keep no schedule. Could be tomorrow." "How far is it to town?" He blinked at the interruption. "Beg pardon?" "The town. Crestwood." "How far?" "About 10 miles west." He gestured vaguely toward where the sun was bleeding into the hills. "But miss, it'll be dark in 2 hours, and that road ain't safe for a woman alone. Is there a shortcut?" The old man's eyebrows climbed toward his hat. He studied her for a long moment. This thin woman in her faded calico dress, dust already settling in the creases of her face, one battered valise at her feet. Whatever he saw made him sigh. "There's a path through Saddleback Canyon, cuts 3 miles off the journey." He pointed northwest toward a gap in the low hills. "Follow the creek bed till you see a split rock. Looks like a broken tooth. Bear left there." He paused, seemed to be debating whether to say more. "But I wouldn't recommend it. Not alone. Not at night. Next train comes through Thursday. You could wait here. Send word to the ranch." Clara picked up her valise. The leather handle was worn smooth from her mother's hands, then her own. She felt the familiar weight of it, solid and real. "I've done enough waiting, I reckon." "Miss?" The station master's voice stopped her at the edge of the platform. "You sure about this?" Clara didn't answer. She stepped off the platform onto the packed dirt road and started walking. The last light of day painted the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Clara kept her eyes on the path ahead, watching for the gap in the hills the station master had described. The air was cooling rapidly. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Behind her back toward town, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Gunshots. 3 of them echoing across the empty land. Then the sound of horses moving fast. Clara's grip tightened on her valise. She quickened her pace, half walking, half running toward the mouth of the canyon. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She told herself the gunshots had nothing to do with her. This was the West. People shot guns all the time. Hunting. Target practice. It didn't mean anything, but some deep instinct told her to run. She reached the canyon just as full darkness fell. The walls rose on either side, not tall but steep enough to block the wind and trap the lingering heat of day. Clara's breath came hard now. The valise felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Her hands were slick with sweat. The sound of the creek was her guide now. She couldn't see much in the darkness, just vague shapes of rock and brush. But she could hear the water steady and constant somewhere to her left. "Keep moving. Don't stop. Don't think about who might be behind you." Clara's mother had always said fear was useless unless it made you run faster. Well, Clara was running now. Her boots slipped on loose gravel. She caught herself against the canyon wall, kept going. And then around a bend in the path, she saw something that made her stop dead. A horse. A tall chestnut with a white blaze on its forehead, standing in the middle of the path. The reins trailed in the dust. The saddle was dark with something that looked black in the moonlight. Blood. Clara approached slowly, her hand outstretched. "Easy, Easy now." The horse snorted but didn't bolt. Its flank twitched when she reached for the reins. That's when Clara saw it clearly. Dark stains on the saddle, smeared along the horse's right side. Too much to be from a scratch or scrape. Clara's stomach dropped. She followed the trail of disturbed earth with her eyes. Scuff marks in the dust. Displaced stones. They led around a tumble of boulders toward a section of the canyon wall where fresh rockfall had spilled across the path. "Walk away," said the sensible voice in her head. "Get on the horse, ride to town, find help." But her mother's voice, the real one, the kind one, said something different. "When you see someone in need, Clara girl, you don't walk past. That's not who we are." Her feet were already moving. The rocks were the color of dried blood in the fading light. Some were small as fists, others large as barrels. They'd come down from the canyon rim recently. Clara could see the fresh scar on the wall above pale against the weathered red. She climbed over the first boulder, then the second, and stopped. A hand jutted out from beneath a slab of granite. Fingers curled toward the sky. Motionless. A man's hand, broad palm, calloused fingers. A simple silver ring on the third finger. Clara dropped her valise. She scrambled over the remaining rocks, heedless of the sharp edges tearing at her dress. The man lay on his side, half buried under the slide. His face was turned away from her, but she could see the rise and fall of his chest. Shallow, labored, but there. Alive. He was alive. "Mister?" She knelt beside him, hands hovering uselessly. "Mister, can you hear me?" No response. His hat had fallen somewhere in the slide. Dark hair matted with blood and dust. A deep gash across his forehead still seeping. His left leg was pinned under a rock too heavy for her to move alone. Clara sat back on her heels, looked at the sky now almost fully dark, looked at the unconscious stranger. The sensible choice was still to ride for help. Leave him here, find the town, bring back men with tools and horses. But the blood was still flowing from that gash, and she remembered what her mother had taught her about head wounds, how the cold crept in fast once the body started giving up. Clara closed her eyes for just a moment. Lord, she prayed silently. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, but I can't leave him here to die. Please give me strength." She opened her eyes, rolled up her sleeves. The smaller rocks came away first. Clara's fingernails split against the granite. She didn't stop. Each stone she pulled free revealed more of the man beneath. His shoulder, the curve of his back, the torn fabric of what had once been a good wool shirt. The smell of blood and dust filled her nose, metallic and dry. His breathing changed, hitched. A low groan escaped his cracked lips. "Hold on." Clara wiped her palms on her skirt, leaving dark smears. "I'm getting you out." The slab pinning his leg was the problem, flat and heavy, wedged at an angle against a larger boulder. Clara braced her shoulder against it, pushed. Her boots scraped against loose gravel. The rock shifted, barely, an inch, maybe two, not enough. Clara repositioned herself, dug her heels into the dirt, pushed again, harder this time, until her arms shook and spots danced at the edges of her vision. The canyon walls seemed to lean in closer, trapping the last heat of day. The slab scraped sideways. His leg came free. Clara collapsed against the boulder, chest heaving. Her hands were raw, bleeding in places. The copper smell of her own blood mixed with his, with the dust, with the faint sage scent carried on the evening breeze. The man's eyes opened. Gray. Pale gray like winter sky before snow. They fixed on her face, unfocused, struggling to make sense of what they saw. His lips moved. No sound came out. Clara reached for the canteen on the horse's saddle. She'd spotted it earlier. Battered leather worn smooth with use. She unscrewed the cap, lifted his head with one hand, tipped a small amount against his mouth. He swallowed, coughed, swallowed again. Water. The word was barely a rasp. "I know. Easy now. Not too fast." His eyes drifted shut, opened again, fixed on her with something approaching clarity. "Who?" Another cough, wet and rattling. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter right now." Clara examined his leg in the dying light. Swollen, already purpling at the ankle, but the bone hadn't broken through the skin. Small mercies. The gash on his forehead was worse than she'd thought, deep enough to show white beneath the red. It needed cleaning, stitching, things she couldn't do here in the failing dark. "There's a cabin." His voice was barely a whisper now. "Half-mile. Follow the creek." Then his eyes rolled back and he went limp in her arms. Clara looked at the horse, looked at the unconscious stranger, looked at the last sliver of sun vanishing behind the canyon rim. Half a mile in the dark with a man twice her weight who might not live till morning. Getting him onto the horse nearly broke her. Clara hooked her arms under his shoulders, pulled. His boots dragged furrows in the dirt, leaving dark trails in the fading light. Dead weight, that's what folks called it. And now she understood why. Every muscle in her back screamed. Her knees buckled twice before she managed to prop him against a boulder. The horse stood patient, watching with those liquid eyes. Its breath came warm against Clara's cheek, smelling of grass and dust. "Come on now." Clara grabbed the man's belt with one hand, his shirt collar with the other. "You got to help me. Just a little." Something flickered across his face. Consciousness, maybe. Or just pain. His good leg moved, found the stirrup. Clara shoved from below, teeth-gritted arms burning. And somehow she would never quite remember how he ended up draped across the saddle like a sack of grain. Clara took the reins and started walking. One step, then another. The creek bed stretched ahead, pale stones glowing faintly in the rising moonlight. "Half a mile," he'd said. "Half a mile." The night sounds began. Crickets chirping in the brush. An owl calling somewhere up the canyon. The soft rush of water over rocks. Clara kept her eyes on the ground, watching for roots and holes that might trip her in the darkness. "Please," she prayed silently. "Please let me find this cabin." The cabin appeared between one blink and the next. Or maybe Clara had simply stopped seeing anything beyond the horse's hooves, the rhythm of placing one foot in front of the other. But there it was. A dark shape hunched against the hillside, barely visible against the trees. The creek gurgled past its western wall, black water catching fragments of starlight. No smoke from the chimney. No light in the windows. Abandoned, just as he'd said. Clara pushed open the door. The hinges shrieked a sound that set her teeth on edge. The smell hit her first. Old wood. Mouse droppings. Something musty and closed in. Beneath that, the faint char of a long dead fire, cold ash and creosote. She fumbled along the mantel. Her fingers brushed rough wood and dust until they found a candle stub. Matches beside it. The box was damp, but not ruined. The match head scraped, flared. The flame sputtered to life, throwing shadows across the single room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, hand-stacked and blackened with years of smoke. A wooden cot with a straw mattress, the ticking stained and lumpy. A table. 2 chairs, one with a leg shorter than the others. An iron pot hanging from a hook over the cold hearth. It smelled like a place that had been forgotten, but it had walls. It had a roof, even if she could see gaps where the stars peeked through. It would have to do. Getting the man inside was harder than getting him onto the horse. Clara had to half-drag, half-carry him. His boots left long scrapes in the dirt floor. By the time she got him onto the cot, she was shaking with exhaustion. His forehead burned against her palm. The fever was already setting in. Clara had seen it before with her mother. The body's response to trauma and infection. If it got too high, if it lasted too long, the brain could be damaged. Or worse. She needed water, needed fire, needed light to work by. The creek was 20 steps from the door. Clara found a dented copper pot hanging on a nail, carried it to the water's edge. The creek ran cold and clear, numbing her fingers as she filled the pot. She carried it back, water sloshing against her skirt, and set it by the hearth. Kindling first. She found dry sticks stacked beside the fireplace, left by whoever had lived here last. Months ago. Years maybe. Crumpled leaves for tinder. The match caught on the second try, and flame crawled up through the kindling, crackling and popping as it found the larger wood. Heat crept into the cabin. Light flickered across the walls, steadier now than the single candle. Clara tore strips from her petticoat. The cotton was worn thin from washing, but clean. She dipped a strip in the warming water, wrung it out, pressed it against the wound on his forehead. The man flinched. His eyes flew open, wild, unseeing, the eyes of a man trapped in nightmare. Easy now. Clara held his shoulders down. He was strong, even injured. You're safe. Lie still. He fought her for a moment. Then the strength drained out of him, and he sank back against the mattress, chest heaving. Clara cleaned the gash with careful strokes the way her mother had taught her, gentle but thorough. The water in the pot turned pink, then red. She dumped it outside, refilled it, started again. The wound was deep but clean. No dirt embedded in the flesh. No fragments of rock. Small mercies again. His leg worried her more. The ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, the skin stretched tight and shiny. Purple bruising spread up toward his knee. Clara ran her fingers along the bone, pressing gently. He groaned but didn't wake. No grinding, no unnatural angles. Sprained, badly sprained, maybe torn, but not broken. She needed something to draw out the fever, something for the swelling. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, clear as Sunday church bells. Mugwort for wounds, Clara girl. Yarrow for fever. Look for the silver-green leaves by running water. Clara took the candle and went back outside. The creek bank yielded what she needed. Mugwort grew in thick clumps near the water's edge, its leaves soft and silvery in the candlelight. Clara gathered handfuls, stuffed them into her apron pockets. Found yarrow too, its flat white flower heads nodding in the darkness. Back inside, she searched the cabin until she found a wooden bowl, cracked but serviceable. A smooth river stone served as a pestle. She crushed the mugwort leaves until they released their sharp, bitter smell. The smell of her mother's kitchen, of childhood, of being safe and cared for. The man hadn't moved. His breathing came fast and shallow now. Sweat beaded on his upper lip, his temples. Clara packed the poultice against his forehead, bound it with another strip of petticoat. Then she turned to his leg, wrapped the crushed yarrow around the ankle, tied it firm but not too tight. She heated more water, poured some into a tin cup she'd found on the shelf, added a few yarrow leaves, let them steep until the water turned pale gold. Here. She lifted his head, held the cup to his lips. Drink this. It'll help with the fever. He swallowed without opening his eyes. Once. Twice. The warm liquid ran down his chin, but some of it went down his throat. Clara eased him back onto the pillow, a rolled-up blanket she'd found. Musty and moth-eaten, but better than nothing. Then she sat down on the floor beside the cot, her back against the rough wood, and waited. The fever peaked somewhere in the deep hours of night. Clara lost track of time. She only knew the rhythm. Check his forehead, wring out the cloth, press it against his burning skin. Again. Again. His body shook with chills, even as heat radiated off him in waves. He muttered words she couldn't understand, names maybe. Once he grabbed her wrist with startling strength, his eyes open but seeing something far away. Catherine. The name was torn from him, raw with pain. The money. Why did you take the money? I'm here, Clara said, though she didn't know why. I'm here. His grip loosened, his eyes closed. Clara went back to her rhythm. Check, ring, apply, repeat. She changed the poultice twice, fed the fire when it burned low, the wood crackling and popping in the silence. The darkness outside the window shifted from black to gray to the pale pink of approaching dawn. And slowly, so slowly, she almost didn't notice his breathing steadied. His skin cooled beneath her palm. The trembling stopped. Clara let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her shoulders ached. Her eyes burned from the smoke and the sleepless hours, but the worst had passed. He woke with the first true light of morning. Clara was dozing against the cot, her neck bent at an angle that would ache for days. The sound of his voice jerked her upright. Where? He coughed, dry and rasping. Where am I? Safe. Clara reached for the water pot, poured some into the tin cup. A cabin by the creek. You told me about it before you passed out. He took the cup with shaking hands, drank. His gray eyes moved around the room, taking in the fire, the bandages, the strips of torn petticoat drying on the hearthstones. You did all this? Clara didn't answer. The question didn't need one. He studied her face for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, confusion giving way to something harder to read. Who are you? Clara hesitated. Then she realized she'd never actually told him. In all the chaos of the rescue, the long night of fever, she'd never said her name. Clara Bennett. Where are you from? St. Louis. His eyebrows rose slightly. Long way from home. I don't have a home anymore. The words came out harder than she'd intended. That's why I came here. He was quiet for a moment, those gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. You should have left me in that canyon, ridden for help. Maybe. Why didn't you? Clara stood, walked to the fire, picked up the pot. She needed something to do with her hands. Because you were dying, and I was there. She turned to face him. Your turn now. Who are you? The pause lasted just a beat too long. Clara saw it, the way his eyes shifted just for a heartbeat before meeting hers again. Eli, he said. Name's Eli Carter. I work on the ranches around here. Clara watched his face as he said it. Her mother had always said Clara had a gift for reading people, for knowing when someone was telling the truth and when they were selling snake oil. This man, this Eli, was hiding something. She didn't know what. Didn't know why a wounded stranger in the middle of nowhere would have reason to lie about something as simple as his own name. But she knew one thing for certain. He wasn't telling her the whole truth. Clara turned back to the fire without comment. She ladled some water into the cup, added a few yarrow leaves, set it near the coals to steep. How bad is it? His voice pulled her back. He was looking at his bandaged leg. Sprained, I think. Maybe torn, but not broken. How can you tell? I can't for certain, but there's no grinding when I press on it, no bone sticking out, and you moved your toes when I wrapped it last night. He flexed his foot slightly, winced. Hurts like hell. It will for a while. Clara brought him the tea, watched him drink it. He had good hands, she noticed, strong and calloused from work, but not brutish, the kind of hands that could be gentle when needed. You know medicine? He asked. My mother taught me. We couldn't afford doctors. She taught you well. She taught me everything she could. Clara took the empty cup back. She passed when I was 17. Consumption. 3 months of coughing and fever, and then one morning she just stopped. She hadn't meant to say so much. Hadn't talked about her mother to anyone since leaving St. Louis. But something about this cabin, this stranger, this strange suspended time between one life and the next, had loosened her tongue. Eli was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside a mockingbird sang. Your father? He asked finally. Never knew him. Mama worked in a textile mill. That's all she ever told me about him. She moved to the table, began organizing what little supplies they had. 4 pieces of cornbread wrapped in cloth, 6 dried apples, the canteen half full. It wasn't much. So you came west, Eli said, all alone. Was there another way? The question sat between them heavy with everything it didn't say. Clara unwrapped the cornbread. It had gone stale 3 days ago, the edges crumbling under her fingers. She'd been rationing these pieces since St. Louis, 1 small square each morning, making them last. Now only 2 remained, and her stomach had been hollow since yesterday. She broke the larger piece in half, then in half again. Weighed the portions in her palms. Then she crossed to the cot and placed the larger portion in Eli's hand. He looked down at it, looked back up at her. The cornbread sat in his palm like something precious, like something he didn't quite know what to do with. What about you? I've got mine. Clara returned to the table, settled onto the floor with her back against the warm hearthstone. The cornbread was dry in her mouth, crumbly. The sweetness had faded to almost nothing. She chewed anyway, slowly, making it last. Eli ate slowly too, methodically. When he finished, he brushed the crumbs from his fingers and fixed his eyes on her face. "You were walking through that canyon alone." It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. "Where were you headed?" She reached into her valise, pulled out the letter, unfolded it carefully, the paper soft from being handled so many times. "Crestwood," she said. Eventually. I was supposed to be met at Thornfield Station." Clara crossed to the cot, showed him the letter. "Man named Josiah Whitmore. He wrote to my mother 3 years ago. Mama was too sick to come then, but she kept the letter, and when she died I figured maybe the offer still stood." Eli took the letter, read it slowly. Something changed in his face as he read. A tightening around the eyes, a stillness that hadn't been there before. "Mail-order bride," he said quietly. "Yes." "And he didn't come?" "No." Clara took the letter back, folded it, put it away. "The station master said this Whitmore owns the biggest ranch in these parts. Cottonwood Ranch, he called it. You know it." Another pause. Eli's jaw tightened just slightly. "I've heard of it." "Then you know more than I do. All I know is 47 words in a letter. Turns out that wasn't much to stake a life on." She turned away, began sorting through her mother's herb journal. The pages were brittle, the drawings faded, but each one was a piece of her mother preserved, a way of keeping her close. "Most women," Eli said behind her, "would be angry." "I am angry." "You don't sound it." Clara closed the journal, set it aside carefully. "Anger doesn't change anything. He didn't come. That's a fact. I can be angry about it, or I can figure out what comes next. Anger's a luxury I can't afford." She heard him shift on the cot, heard the sharp intake of breath as his injured leg protested the movement. "You should rest," she said without turning around. "That fever will come back if you don't." "Clara." Something in the way he said her name made her turn. "Thank you," he said, "for not leaving me in that canyon to die." Clara studied his face, the bandage on his forehead, the gray eyes that seemed to hold secrets. "You're welcome," she said finally. "But don't thank me yet. We're not out of this canyon, and I still don't know if you're going to make it." She meant it as a practical statement of fact, but something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like guilt. Then it was gone, and he was closing his eyes, settling back against the thin pillow. Clara watched him for a moment longer. Then she turned back to her work, wondering why a man who'd just been saved would look guilty instead of grateful, and wondering what name he'd called out in his fever. Catherine. Who was Catherine? And why did the name sound like it had been torn from somewhere deep and wounded? Clara added it to the growing list of questions she couldn't answer. Outside, the sun climbed higher, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and amber. Inside the cabin, 2 strangers who weren't quite strangers sat in silence, each carrying secrets they weren't ready to share. The first day passed slowly. Clara tended Eli's wounds, changed his bandages, made him drink yarrow tea every few hours. He slept most of the time, his body fighting the infection and exhaustion. When he was awake, they talked in short, careful exchanges. Nothing too deep, nothing too revealing. By evening, Clara knew he'd worked on ranches since he was 16, that he knew cattle and horses, that he'd been riding through the canyon when the rock slide hit, though he didn't say why he'd been there or where he'd been going. And Clara told him about St. Louis, about the boarding house and the laundry work, about the letter that had given her a reason to leave. But she didn't tell him about the gunshots she'd heard, about the feeling that she'd been running from something, not just toward something. Some truths were better kept close. By the second morning, Eli could sit up without help. The fever had broken during the night, leaving him weak but clear-headed. Clara changed his bandages as the early light filtered through the gaps in the cabin walls, turning dust motes into tiny stars. The gash on his forehead was closing well, no redness spreading outward, no smell of infection. His ankle remained swollen, but the angry purple had started to fade at the edges, giving way to yellow-green, healing slowly but surely. "You know what you're doing," Eli said, watching her work. With the herbs, the bandages. Most people wouldn't. Clara dipped a fresh strip of cloth in warm water, wrung it out carefully. Most people have doctors to call on. Where did you learn it? Really learn it, I mean. Not just watching your mother. By doing it. Clara pressed the cloth against his forehead, cleaning away the dried blood and ointment. Mama got sick when I was 14. Took 3 years for the consumption to kill her. 3 years of me learning every plant I could find, every remedy that might help. Didn't save her. But I learned. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she applied fresh mugwort paste wrapped a clean bandage. Eli stayed still, but she could feel his eyes on her face. I'm sorry, he said quietly. About your mother. So am I. Clara tied off the bandage, sat back to examine her work. You'll have a scar. Can't help that. But it should heal clean. Better a scar than dead. That's the truth of it. She moved to his ankle, next unwrapping the old bandage. The swelling had gone down considerably. Another few days and he'd be walking properly. Another few days and he'd leave. The thought created an unexpected hollowness in her chest, which was foolish. She barely knew this man, didn't even know if Eli Carter was his real name. Can you stand? Clara asked, pushing the thought away. I can try. Eli swung his legs over the side of the cot, wincing as his feet touched the floor. Clara moved to his side, offered her arm for support. He was tall, she realized, much taller than she'd understood when he was lying down. 6 feet at least, maybe more. His hand on her shoulder was heavy, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. He put weight on his good leg first, then tested the injured ankle. His jaw clenched, but he didn't cry out. Not broken, he confirmed. You were right. Can you walk? Give me something to lean on. Clara found a sturdy branch outside, stripped off the smaller twigs, fashioned a rough crutch. Eli took a few experimental steps across the cabin floor. His gait was uneven, labored but functional. Good enough, he said. I can make it to the creek at least. You need to wash. The fever's gone, but you're still covered in dust and dried blood. Eli looked down at himself, seemed to notice for the first time how filthy he was. His shirt was torn and stained. His pants were caked with mud and rock dust. Guess I do at that. Clara helped him down to the creek bank. The morning sun was warm on her face, the air fresh and clean after 2 days inside the cabin. She left him at the water's edge, gave him privacy while she gathered more herbs. The creek banks were rich with useful plants. Clara worked methodically, filling her apron pockets with leaves and stems. Mugwort for continued wound care, yarrow for fever prevention, dock with its broad green leaves in case of insect bites. And then she found something that made her pause. Willow bark, her mother's remedy for pain. Clara stripped several pieces, carefully tucked them into her apron. Tonight she'd make a tea that would help Eli sleep without the deep ache of his injuries waking him. When she returned to the creek, Eli had managed to wash his face and arms. His shirt was off, draped over a rock to dry. Clara tried not to stare at the scars on his back, long pale lines that spoke of old violence. One particular scar ran from his right shoulder blade down to his ribs, thick and puckered. He saw her looking, pulled his shirt back on quickly despite it being wet. Old injuries, he said, not meeting her eyes. From when I was younger. Must have been some accident. Something like that. Clara didn't push. Everyone had secrets. She had her own. Here. She held out her hand, showing him the plants she'd gathered. I want to teach you about these, in case you're ever in a situation where you need them again. Eli's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. Why would you do that? Because you asked me yesterday how I learned, and because knowledge kept freely is knowledge wasted. She knelt beside a patch of mugwort, gestured for him to join her. He lowered himself carefully to the ground, his injured leg stretched out before him. Mugwort. Clara pulled a stem, held it up so he could see the silvery underside of the leaves. They felt soft between her fingers, almost fuzzy, releasing their sharp green smell. Good for wounds and infections. You crush it into a paste with a little water. The smell tells you when it's ready. Bitter like medicine ought to be. Eli took the stem from her hand. Their fingers brushed brief and warm. He turned the plant over, studying it with careful attention. How do you know it's mugwort, and not something that'll make things worse? The leaves. Clara knelt beside another clump, pointed to the distinctive shape. Damp earth soaked through her skirt at the knees, cool and rich smelling. See how they're cut almost like feathers, and that silver-green color underneath. Nothing else around here looks quite like it. He knelt beside her, his shoulder close to hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, smell the soap he'd used mixing with the scent of creek water and sage. Clara stood up quickly, moved to the next plant. Yarrow. She kept her voice steady, professional. The white flowers nodded in the slight breeze. Good for fever, for bringing down swelling. You can steep it in hot water for tea or wrap the leaves straight on the skin. Eli followed her slower, his makeshift crutch sinking into the soft earth near the water. He asked questions that showed he was truly listening, truly learning, not just humoring her. What about that one? He pointed to a low-growing plant near the water's edge, its leaves broad and deep green catching the light. Doc. Clara crouched down, her reflection wavering in the creek beside her. The water was so clear she could see the pebbles on the bottom, brown and gold and gray. Good for rashes, insect bites, that sort of thing. The root's the useful part. You have to dig for it. She pulled some leaves aside to show the thick root beneath. But you've got to be careful. There's another plant looks similar, grows further from the water. That one will make you plenty sick. How do you tell them apart? Practice. Clara let the leaves fall back into place, straightened up. Her knees ached from crouching. My mama made me learn every plant in the woods behind our place, tested me till I could name them with my eyes closed. Eli was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had gone soft. She sounds like she was a good woman, your mother. Clara's throat tightened. She turned away, pretended to study a cluster of chamomile growing between two flat rocks. She was practical. That's what kept us alive. They worked their way along the creek bank, Clara pointing out plants, Eli listening and learning. The sun moved across the sky slow and warm. Shadows lengthened. The air grew cooler as the afternoon wore on, carrying the sweet smell of water and green growing things. Clara lost track of time, lost track of the careful distance she'd been keeping. There was something about teaching that opened her up, words flowing without the usual guards, her hands moving to show what her mouth described. And Eli listened, really listened. Not the way men usually did, half their attention somewhere else, just waiting for their chance to talk. He took in every word, asked questions that proved he understood, stored each piece of information away like it mattered, like she mattered. The thought caught her off guard. She stumbled on a root and Eli's hand shot out to catch her elbow, warm and strong, steadying her before she could fall. Careful there. Clara pulled away too quickly. She saw something cross his face. Surprise, maybe, or something that might have been hurt before he covered it over. Thank you kindly. I'm fine. They stood there, the creek singing between them, the afternoon light turning everything to gold. Clara could still feel where his hand had been warm against her arm. We should head back, she said, before dark. Eli nodded, but he didn't move. Just stood there watching her with those gray eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to show. Clara. Her name in his mouth did something strange to her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time, if ever. She waited. When I'm healed up, he said. When I can walk proper again. He paused, swallowed. I'll have to go. She'd known it was coming, had been bracing herself for it since that first morning he'd woken up in the cabin. But hearing him say it out loud made something twist beneath her ribs. I know. You've got your own life to get back to. Yes. The word dropped between them like a stone into still water. Clara turned toward the cabin, took one step, two. What about you? Eli's voice stopped her. Where will you go? She didn't turn around. Couldn't. Crestwood, I reckon. Find work there. A laundry maybe, or a boarding house. There's always work for women who aren't afraid of hard labor. By yourself. That's how I got here. That's how I'll leave." Silence. The creek rushed on, heedless of them both. A fish jumped somewhere downstream, a silver flash and a splash. "It doesn't have to be that way," Eli said. His voice was barely louder than the water. "Alone, I mean." Clara's breath caught. She turned slowly, found him watching her with something raw and unguarded written plain across his face. "What are you saying?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. The openness vanished so fast she almost thought she'd imagined it replaced by his usual careful blankness. "Nothing." He looked away toward the cabin. "Never mind. Forget I said anything." But Clara couldn't forget. Couldn't unknow the way he'd looked at her in that unguarded moment, like she was something worth having, something worth keeping. She walked back to the cabin without another word, her thoughts churning like the creek over its stones. That night Clara made willow bark tea. She watched Eli drink it, saw the tension ease from his shoulders as the pain medicine took effect. Within an hour he was sleeping deeply, his breathing slow and even. Clara sat by the fire, turning the brass watch over in her hands. The firelight caught the yellowed face, made the hands glow. 10:30. Her mother would have been winding this watch right about now, preparing for bed. Keep moving forward, Clara girl. But which way was forward? Back to Crestwood to find work as a laundress or a cook. Try to locate Josiah Whitmore. Demand an explanation for why he hadn't come to the station. Or something else. Something she was afraid to name. She looked at Eli sleeping peacefully for the first time since the accident. His face was relaxed, the hard lines softened. He looked younger somehow, vulnerable. Who are you really, Clara thought? And why did you lie about your name? Because she was certain now that he had lied. Small things didn't add up. The quality of his shirt before it had been torn, the way he held himself even injured, the silver ring on his finger, real silver, not tin. This was not a man who worked for wages on other people's ranches. A sound outside made Clara's head snap up. Horses. Multiple horses moving at a walk. Close, maybe a quarter-mile away. She moved to the window, peered through the gap in the boards. Couldn't see anything in the darkness. But the sound was unmistakable. 3 horses, maybe 4, coming this direction. Clara's heart began to pound. She crossed to the cot, shook Eli's shoulder urgently. "Wake up! Someone's coming." He came awake instantly, no grogginess. His hand went to his hip, searching for something that wasn't there. A gun, Clara realized. How many? 3 or 4 horses, maybe a quarter-mile out. Eli pushed himself up, jaw clenched against the pane. "Put out the fire. Quick." Clara grabbed the water pot, dumped it over the flames. Steam hissed up, filling the cabin with the smell of wet ash. The darkness was sudden and complete. "Could be ranch hands," Eli said quietly. "Could be travelers passing through." "Could be." But Clara heard the doubt in his voice. They sat in the darkness listening. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Voices too distant to make out words. Then silence. Clara's mouth was dry. She reached for Eli in the darkness, found his arm. "Who are they?" "I don't know." His voice was barely a whisper. "But this canyon isn't safe. There are men who use it to move stolen cattle. Outlaws. If they found us here alone—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. They waited in the dark for what felt like hours. Eventually, the sounds faded. The horses moved on, heading deeper into the canyon. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just had a very close call, and that whoever those riders were, they'd be back. The 4th day dawned gray and threatening. Clouds rolled in from the north, heavy and dark. The air pressure dropped, making Clara's ears ache. A storm was coming. Eli could walk now without the crutch, though his limp was pronounced. He moved around the cabin restlessly, checking the roof, the door, making sure everything was as secure as possible. "It's going to be bad," he said, looking at the sky. "We need to prepare." They spent the morning gathering firewood, storing it inside where it would stay dry. Filled every container they had with water from the creek. Checked and rechecked that the horse was securely tied with access to shelter. By afternoon, the first drops began to fall. Big, heavy drops that struck the roof like thrown pebbles. Then the sky opened up. Clara had never seen rain like this. In St. Louis, rain came and went, sometimes heavy, but nothing like this. This was rain that fell in sheets so thick she couldn't see the creek anymore, just 10 feet from the door. Thunder rolled across the canyon, echoing off the walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Lightning cracked brilliant white, illuminating the world in frozen flashes. In those brief moments of light, Clara saw the creek rising, saw the water climbing the bank, swallowing the places where she'd knelt just that morning teaching Eli about Yarrow and Doc. The roof began to leak almost at once. First one drip, then another, then a steady stream in the corner near the cot. Water running down the wall like tears. Here. Eli was already dragging the cot toward the far wall where the roof seemed more solid. His ankle gave out halfway across. He went down hard, catching himself with his hands, breathing hard. Clara was beside him in an instant. "Let me help. I've got it." "You don't. Stop being stubborn." Together they hauled the cot the rest of the way. Water was running in from multiple places now. The packed dirt floor was turning to mud, dark and slick. They worked without speaking. Clara gathered what she could save. The blankets, her valise, the precious herbs she'd spent days collecting. Eli wrestled the table away from a growing pool, stacked their remaining food on the highest shelf he could reach. By midnight, the cabin had become a swamp. The corner near the hearth was the only spot still relatively dry, a space maybe 4 feet square pressed against the warm stones. Clara and Eli huddled there, backs to the wall, the single moth-eaten blanket stretched across both their shoulders. The fire had died when water found its way down the chimney, turning the coals to hissing black nothing. And now the darkness was complete, except when lightning split the sky. Clara's teeth chattered. Her dress was soaked from the waist down, heavy and cold against her legs. The smell of wet wool and mud filled her nose. She drew her knees up, wrapped her arms around them, tried to make herself small. This was what her life had come to. Crouching in a leaking shack in the middle of nowhere, covered in mud and creek water, shivering beside a man she didn't really know. The woman who'd stepped off the train at Thornfield Station seemed like a stranger now. A fool. A child who'd believed that 47 words could change her life. "Clara," Eli's voice was barely audible above the rain hammering the roof. She lifted her head, found his face in the darkness, a pale shape against the deeper black. "There's something I need to tell you." The words hung between them. Clara waited, her heart beating slow and heavy in her chest. "I haven't been honest with you. When you found me in that canyon, when you asked my name, I wasn't completely truthful." Thunder exploded overhead so close the whole cabin shook. The horse screamed outside, a sound of pure animal terror. Eli was on his feet before Clara could react, lurching toward the door. "The horse, if she runs off." He threw the door open and disappeared into the wall of rain. Clara scrambled up, stumbled to the doorway. Lightning showed her the scene in frozen snapshots. Eli fighting through mud that sucked at his boots with every step. The horse rearing against her tether eyes, white with fear. Rain driving sideways in the wind so thick it looked like smoke. She watched him grab for the reins, watched his boots slide in the muck, watched him go down. He fell hard face first into the mud. The horse's hooves came down inches from his head, churning the ground to black soup. He rolled, came up on his hands and knees, mud coating his face, his hair filling his mouth. He spat, grabbed for the reins again. The horse reared. He held on. For a long moment, it was just the two of them, man and beast, locked in a battle neither could afford to lose. Eli's bad ankle buckled. He went down on one knee, sank past his shin into the muck. But his grip on the reins didn't break. The horse screamed again, pulled, fought. Then something shifted. The animal's head dropped. Her sides heaved. She stood trembling, beaten down by the storm. Eli pulled himself upright, using the saddle for support. He led her to the lee side of the cabin, tied the reins to a post, driven deep in the ground. His hands slipped twice on the wet leather. When he came back inside, he looked like something dragged up from the grave. Mud caked every inch of him, his clothes, his skin, the creases of his face. He stood in the doorway, water streaming off him in rivers. Clara handed him what was left of the blanket. He took it, didn't wrap it around himself, just stood there holding it, dripping filth onto the floor, staring at nothing. "What were you going to tell me?" The question came out harder than she meant it to. Eli flinched like she'd struck him. "Nothing." He turned away, moved toward the dry corner. "It doesn't matter." "It does matter." Clara followed him, stood blocking his path. "You were about to say something, before the horse, before the thunder. You were going to tell me you lied." Lightning flashed again. His face appeared in the white light, mud-streaked, exhausted, and something else, something that looked like shame burning so bright it hurt to see. "Not tonight." His voice was barely a whisper. "Please, not tonight." Clara studied him for a long moment, the mud in his hair, the tremor in his hands, the way he couldn't meet her eyes. She stepped aside. They didn't speak again that night. Clara curled into her corner, wet and cold and miserable. Eli sat against the opposite wall, the blanket draped over his shoulders, mud drying in cracks across his face. The storm raged on, but inside the cabin a different kind of silence had taken hold. The silence of words unsaid, of truths postponed. Of two people who both knew that when morning came, everything would have to change. Clara must have slept because she woke to stillness. The rain had stopped. Gray light seeped through the cracks in the walls, showing the ruin of their shelter. Mud everywhere. Standing water in the low spots. Their belongings scattered and soaked. Eli was already up, standing by the door, looking out at a world washed clean. He'd scraped most of the mud from his face, though traces still clung in his hairline behind his ears. His clothes were stiff with dried dirt. "We need to go," he said without turning around. Clara pushed herself upright. Every muscle ached. "Go where?" "Away from here. This place won't make it through another storm." He paused, drew a breath. "And there's somewhere I need to take you." "Where?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, scraped, raw. "Trust me. Can you do that? Just trust me." Clara thought about the night before, the interrupted confession, the shame in his eyes. She thought about all the things she didn't know, all the questions he wouldn't answer. "Yes," she said. "I reckon I can." Something moved across his face. Relief, maybe, or resignation, or something too complicated to name. "Good." He turned back to the ruined cabin. "We leave as soon as you're ready." It took an hour to gather what could be saved and load it onto the horse. The animal was nervous, still spooked from the storm, but she didn't bolt. Eli spoke to her in low, soothing tones, ran his hand along her neck until she calmed. They left the cabin as the sun broke through the clouds. Steam rose from the wet earth, turning the canyon into something dreamlike and strange. Clara took one last look at the place that had been her whole world for 4 days. The place where she'd saved a stranger's life. The place where she'd felt for a brief moment useful, needed. "Ready?" Eli stood beside the horse, reins in hand. Clara nodded. He helped her up into the saddle, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist to hold the reins. She could feel his chest against her back, solid and warm. They rode out of the canyon as the morning light turned everything to gold. The grassland stretched before them, endless waves of yellow and brown and pale green. Clara had never seen so much empty space. In St. Louis, buildings crowded together, blocking out the sky. Here the sky went on forever, blue and vast, with clouds piled on the horizon like mountains made of cotton. They rode for 2 hours in silence. Eli's arm stayed around Clara's waist, but it felt different now, heavier, like a weight he was carrying. Then over a rise to the east, a rider appeared. A young man on a paint horse driving a small herd of cattle toward a fence line in the distance. Clara felt Eli tense behind her, felt the change in his breathing. The rider noticed them, wheeled his horse around, came closer at a trot. He was young, maybe 22, with a sun-darkened face and easy confidence in the saddle. He pulled up 20 feet away. Dust rose from his horse's hooves, caught the sunlight, settled slow. "Mr. Whitmore." The name hit Clara like a physical blow. The rider pushed back his hat. "We've been looking for you, sir. Whole outfit's been out searching since Tuesday last." "Mr. Whitmore." Clara's spine went rigid. She turned her head, tried to see Eli's face, but he wasn't looking at her. His jaw was set hard, his eyes fixed on the rider. "I'm fine, Jake. Had some trouble in the canyon. This woman here found me. Took care of me." The rider Jake glanced at Clara. Curiosity flickered in his eyes there and gone quickly hidden behind the blank face of a man who knew better than to ask questions of his betters. "Yes, sir. Should I ride ahead? Let Mr. Hayes know you're coming in." "Do that." Jake touched his hat again, wheeled his horse, and took off at a gallop toward the horizon. Clara waited until he was gone, swallowed by the golden grass. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. The name fell between them flat and hard. Eli said nothing. His arm stayed around her waist, but it felt different now. Heavier, like chains instead of comfort. "That's what he called you, Mr. Whitmore." Still nothing. Clara faced forward again, stared at the grassland stretching out before them, the distant line of fence posts, the smudge of buildings on the horizon that hadn't been there an hour ago. "You're going to explain," she said. Her voice came out steady cold. "When we get wherever we're going, you're going to explain everything." "Yes." His voice was barely more than a breath against her hair. "I will." They passed 3 more riders before reaching the gate. Each one stopped. Each one touched his hat. Each one called him Mr. Whitmore, or simply Sir, with the kind of deference that couldn't be learned or faked, the deference of men who depended on another man for their livelihood. Clara felt their eyes on her, curious questioning, but nobody asked who she was. Nobody said a word beyond their greeting and their assurance that they were glad to see him safe. The buildings grew larger as they approached. What she'd taken for a single structure from far off turned out to be many. A main house with a wraparound porch, a long bunkhouse with smoke rising from its chimney, a barn bigger than any building Clara had ever seen, stables, corrals, outbuildings she couldn't name, all of it spread across the landscape like a small town unto itself. And then she saw the gate, massive posts of weathered oak silver gray with age, a crossbeam high overhead, and mounted on that crossbeam, a sign, Cottonwood Ranch. The brass watch in her pocket felt suddenly heavy. The letter, folded and worn from being read too many times, seemed to burn against her skin. Cottonwood Ranch, the place where Josiah Whitmore lived, the man who'd written 47 words that had brought her here, the man whose name the writer had called Eli. The horse stopped just inside the gate. An old man came running from the barn, white hair flying beneath a battered hat, weathered face creased deep by sun and wind, bow-legged gait of someone who'd spent 60 years in the saddle. He was shouting something, words Clara couldn't quite make sense of through the roaring in her ears. And then he was at the horse's side, looking up at Eli with tears cutting tracks through the dust on his cheeks. "Mr. Josiah, sweet mercy, we thought you was dead. Found your hat in that canyon, all that blood on the rocks. Been searching high and low for a week now." Josiah. The name hung in the air between them like an accusation. Clara turned, looked at the man behind her. Really looked the way she should have looked from the very first day. His face had gone pale beneath the sunburn and the healing cuts. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. And his eyes, those gray eyes that had watched her so carefully for 4 days now, were fixed on her face with something that looked like a man waiting for the axe to fall. "Josiah," Clara said. The word came out wrong, crooked. "Not Eli. Josiah Whitmore." He didn't deny it. "The man who wrote me those letters, the man who was supposed to meet me at the station." "Yes." One word. No excuse. No explanation. The old man, the foreman, went quiet. His eyes moved between them, relief giving way to confusion. Clara was sliding down from the horse now, her legs unsteady beneath her. Her hands shook as she gripped the saddle to keep from falling. Her boots hit the packed dirt. The ground felt too solid, too real. "You knew." She faced Josiah, still mounted, still looking down at her with that terrible expression. "From the very beginning you knew who I was." "Yes." You let me think. Her voice cracked. She swallowed, started again. You let me tell you everything. My mother. The letters. Why I came west. All of it. And the whole time you knew. Yes. The foreman had backed away, was gesturing urgently to someone near the barn. Hands were gathering, faces appearing in doorways and around corners drawn by the commotion. Clara didn't care. Didn't care who heard, who saw, who knew. I saved your life. The words scraped out of her throat like broken glass. I pulled you out of that canyon. I sat up all night when you were burning with fever. I gave you half my food when I was starving myself. And you... She stopped. Couldn't go on. The anger was choking her, rising up from somewhere deep. And underneath it was something worse, something that felt like grief. Josiah swung down from the horse slowly, carefully. His bad ankle nearly gave way when his boots hit the ground, but he caught himself on the saddle, straightened, faced her. I'm sorry, he said. Sorry. The word tasted like ashes on her tongue. You're sorry. There's nothing I can say that will make this right. His voice was quiet, steady. The voice of a man who had made his choice and was prepared to face the consequences. I lied to you. I tested you. I let you believe I was somebody I wasn't. He gestured at the house, the barn, the land stretching out in every direction. Thousands of acres, thousands of cattle, a fortune in grass and water and sky. I wanted to know whether you were real, whether you came out here looking for me or looking for all this. Clara stared at him. The anger was still there, hot and bright, but something else was pushing up beneath it, something she wasn't ready to name. And what did you decide? The question hung between them. All around the ranch had gone quiet, hands stopping their work, faces turning toward the two figures standing in the shadow of the gate. Josiah's throat worked. He swallowed once, twice. You gave me half your cornbread when you thought I didn't have a dime to my name. His voice had dropped so low she had to strain to hear it. You taught me about plants like I was worth teaching. You sat with me through that storm when you could have stayed dry by what was left of the fire. He took a step toward her. Clara didn't back away. You asked me once what you wanted from the man who sent for you. You said a roof walls somewhere to belong. You deserve better than that. Better than a man who lies. Better than a man who tests people because he's too scared to trust them. The words landed like blows. Clara stood still as stone, the wind catching a loose strand of her hair, blowing it across her face. She didn't brush it away. So you're sending me off then? No. The word came out sharp, almost desperate. I'm telling you the truth. Finally, all of it. And then I'm asking you to choose. Josiah turned, pointed toward the house. The white-painted structure stood proud against the blue sky, 2 stories tall with windows that caught the afternoon light like promises. That room on the 2nd floor, he said. The one with the windows facing east where the morning light comes in first. I had it fixed up for you. For my bride. He paused, drew a breath that shook on the way in. There's dresses in the wardrobe, books on the shelves, everything I could think of that a woman might want. He turned back to face her. It's yours if you want it. The room, the ranch, everything I have. But only if you want it. Only if you can find it in you to forgive a fool and a coward. The foreman had disappeared. The hands had drifted away, finding sudden pressing business elsewhere. It was just the two of them now standing in the shadow of the gate, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold and amber. Clara looked at the house, looked at the man, looked at the choice he was putting in her hands. I need time, she said finally. Time to think. Something flickered across Josiah's face. Relief, fear, hope, all tangled together, impossible to separate. Take as long as you need. It might be a good while. I'll wait. Clara walked toward the house, her boots crunching on the packed dirt. At the porch steps she stopped, turned back. Josiah. He looked up. Those gray eyes that had watched her so carefully in the cabin now filled with something that looked like drowning. Those letters you wrote, those 47 words, were any of them real? He didn't hesitate. Every last one. Clara studied his face for a long moment. Then she climbed the steps, crossed the porch, and disappeared through the door. The room smelled of lavender and lemon oil. Clara stood in the doorway, unable to move. The bed was made up with a white quilt hand-stitched in a pattern of interlocking wedding rings, the same pattern her grandmother had sewn back in a time Clara could barely remember. A wardrobe of dark oak stood against one wall, its doors slightly open to show the edges of fabric inside. Calico, gingham, something that might have been blue silk. A washstand held a porcelain basin painted with tiny roses. A rocking chair sat by the window, positioned to catch the morning light. He'd prepared all of this. For her. For a woman he'd never met. A knock at the door made Clara turn. An older woman stood there, sturdy and weathered, with iron-gray hair pulled back tight and kind eyes set deep in a lined face. "Miss Bennett, I'm Martha Hayes. I cook for the ranch." She carried a tray with a bowl of soup, fresh bread, and a cup of tea. "Thought you might be hungry." Clara was hungry. Starving, actually. She hadn't eaten since the last of the dried apples that morning. "Thank you." Martha set the tray on a small table by the window, but she didn't leave. She stood there, hands folded, watching Clara with an expression that was hard to read. "You're the one who saved him," Martha said. It wasn't a question. "I found him in the canyon, yes." "Thomas told me. Said you pulled him out from under the rocks, tended his wounds, sat with him through the fever." Clara said nothing. She moved to the washstand, poured water into the basin, began washing her hands. The water turned gray with dirt and dried blood. "Mr. Josiah is a good man," Martha said quietly. "I've worked for him 6 years now. Never seen him be cruel or unfair. Never seen him cheat a soul." "But," Clara heard the word coming, could feel it in the air between them. "But he's been hurt. Badly. And hurt people sometimes do foolish things trying to protect themselves." Clara dried her hands on a towel, turned to face the older woman. "You knew about his plan, about the lying." Martha shook her head. "Not till Thomas told me this afternoon, but I'm not surprised. After what Catherine did to him, I'm not surprised at all." Catherine. His wife, 3 years back. Martha's expression hardened. Beautiful woman. Said all the right things. He married her inside a month. Clara sat down in the rocking chair, suddenly too tired to stand. 6 weeks later she was gone, Martha continued. Took $2,000 from the safe. Ran off with a gambler from Abilene. Turned out she was already married. Had been the whole time. They'd been running the same game for years, territory to territory, ranch to ranch. The words settled over Clara like a weight. She thought about Josiah in the cabin, asking if she'd come west for money. The careful way he'd watched her when she talked about Josiah Whitmore, the man she'd never met. "I'm not her," Clara said. "I know that. Mr. Josiah knows it too now, but he had to see it for himself. Had to know for sure." Martha moved toward the door, paused with her hand on the frame. "He'll give you all the time you need. He's a patient man when it matters, but don't take so long deciding that you miss your chance." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Clara ate the soup slowly. It was good. Rich beef broth with vegetables and barley. The bread was fresh, still warm. The tea was strong and sweet. When she finished, she stood at the window and looked out at the land rolling away toward the horizon. Fences, cattle moving in slow clusters across the grass, the glint of water where a creek wound through the pasture. His land, his cattle, his creek, his lie, but also his truth. Because everything Martha had said rang true. Clara had seen it herself in the cabin. The way Josiah had looked at the cornbread like nobody had ever given him anything before. The way he'd learned about the herbs with such careful attention. The way he'd risked his life in the storm to save the horse. That wasn't the behavior of a cruel man, or a greedy one. That was the behavior of a man who'd been broken and was trying to figure out how to trust again. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. What did she want? The next morning Clara woke to find a dress laid out on the chair. Simple blue cotton, nothing fancy, but clean and whole. A note was pinned to it in careful handwriting. Thought you might want something that doesn't smell like creek water and smoke. The wardrobe has more if this doesn't suit. Take your time. M.H. Clara bathed in the porcelain basin, washing away 4 days of dirt and sweat and fear. She put on the blue dress. It fit perfectly. How had Josiah known her size? She thought of her mother's dresses hanging in the boarding house closet in St. Louis. The same size Clara wore now. Had Josiah asked in his letters? Had her mother told him so many questions? And Josiah was the only one who could answer them. But she wasn't ready to face him yet. Clara spent the morning exploring the house. It was bigger than any place she'd ever lived. 7 rooms downstairs, 5 bedrooms upstairs, a library with books lining every wall, a dining room with a table that could seat 12, and everywhere signs of wealth, real paintings on the walls, rugs from Persia, silver candlesticks, crystal glassware. This was what Catherine had wanted. This was what Clara was supposed to want if Josiah's test had proved her false. But all Clara felt was overwhelmed. In the late morning a carriage arrived. Clara watched from the upstairs window as a woman climbed down, tall and slender with dark hair pulled back under a practical bonnet. She carried a basket covered with a cloth. Martha met her at the door. There was an embrace, warm and familiar. Then both women looked up at Clara's window. Clara stepped back, suddenly self-conscious. A few minutes later there was a knock at her door. "Miss Bennett, you have a visitor." The woman from the carriage stood in the hallway. Up close, Clara could see she was older than she'd first appeared. Maybe 40, with lines around her eyes and a few silver threads in her dark hair. "I'm Sarah Miller," she said. "I own the ranch to the west, about 5 miles that way." She gestured vaguely. "Heard you were here. Thought I'd come say hello woman to woman. This place can feel pretty lonely if you're not used to it." Clara invited her in. Sarah set the basket on the table, pulled back the cloth to reveal fresh baked goods, cinnamon rolls still warm. "Figured you might like something sweet. God knows Martha's a fine cook, but she's not much for desserts." They sat by the window. Sarah poured coffee from a thermos she'd brought. For a while they just sat in comfortable silence, eating and drinking and watching the ranch hands work in the corrals below. "You're wondering if you can trust him," Sarah said finally. "Josiah, I mean." Clara hadn't expected such directness, but maybe that was the way out here. No time for dancing around the truth. "Yes. Can't answer that for you, but I can tell you what I know." Sarah set down her cup. "I've been neighbors with Josiah for 8 years now. Since before Catherine." The name hung in the air between them. "He was different then," Sarah continued. "Easier, quicker to smile. He'd come to barn dances, help with harvests, host dinners. A good neighbor, a good man. And after Catherine he closed up, stopped coming to town except for business, stopped trusting. I tried to warn him about her, you know. We all did. But he was in love, or thought he was. Wouldn't hear it." Sarah picked up a cinnamon roll, pulled off a piece, but didn't eat it. When she left, when he found out the truth, it broke something in him. Not the losing the money, the knowing he'd been that wrong about someone, that blind. Clara understood that. She'd felt something similar when her mother died. The knowledge that she'd failed to save the person she loved most, that all her herbs and teas and careful nursing hadn't been enough. "But yesterday," Sarah said, "when he rode in with you, when Thomas told me what happened, how you saved him, how he'd been living with you in that cabin for 4 days. She smiled. "Thomas said it was the first time in 3 years he'd seen Josiah look at someone the way he looked at you." "He lied to me." "Yes, he did. And that was wrong. I'm not defending it." Sarah met Clara's eyes. "But I understand why he did it. Doesn't make it right. Just makes it human." After Sarah left, Clara sat alone with her thoughts. The sun climbed higher, painting the room in shades of gold. Somewhere downstairs she could hear Martha singing. Outside the ranch hummed with life and work. This could be hers, all of it. The room, the house, the land stretching to the horizon. Security she'd never dreamed of. A place where she wouldn't be 1 bad month away from homelessness. But at what cost? Living with a man who'd tested her like she was livestock, who might never fully trust her. A commotion outside drew her to the window. 3 riders approaching fast. They slowed as they neared the house, but there was urgency in their movements. Clara watched as Josiah came out of the barn. Even from here she could see the tension in his shoulders. The riders dismounted. One of them handed Josiah something. A paper. A letter, maybe. Josiah read it. His whole body went rigid. Then he was striding toward the house, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. Clara heard his boots on the stairs. The knock on her door was hard, urgent. "Clara, I need to speak with you." She opened the door. Josiah stood there, hat in hand, a letter clutched in his other fist. His face was pale. "What's wrong?" This came from Crestwood, from Ezra Brennan. He held out the letter. "He's demanding I sell him the water rights to Willow Creek." Clara's blood ran cold, not just from the threat, but from the signature. Ezra Brennan, the same name, the same man from St. Louis. "You know him?" Josiah asked, seeing her face go white. "I saw him kill a man, in St. Louis, 3 nights before I left. That's why I was running." Clara's voice shook. "He saw me. He must have sent men after me. They must have tracked me here." Josiah's expression darkened. "That's why there were gunshots at the station. That's why you were running through the canyon." Clara nodded. "I thought I'd lost them. But if he knows I'm here—" "He has men everywhere," Josiah said grimly. "Spies, informants. Someone must have told him about the woman who arrived at my ranch." Clara took the letter, read it quickly. The handwriting was elegant, educated, but the words were pure threat. "Whitmore, you have 48 hours to sign over the water rights to Willow Creek. If you refuse, I will take them by other means. I know you have a woman in your house now. Miss Bennett, I believe. Very pretty from what I'm told. Would be a shame if something happened to her. The West is dangerous for women alone. Accidents happen. Sincerely, Ezra Brennan." Clara's blood ran cold. She read the letter again, the words no less chilling the second time. "Who is he?" "Land baron, railroad man. He's been trying to buy cottonwood for 2 years. I keep refusing." Josiah's jaw clenched. "He wants to run a rail line through this valley. Needs the water rights to do it. If he gets them, every ranch within 20 miles will dry up, including Sarah Miller's place. Can he do this legally?" "No, but Brennan doesn't care much about legal. He has money, hired guns, and judges in his pocket." Josiah looked at Clara, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Fear, not for himself but for her. "I'm sending you to town, to Crestwood. You'll stay at the hotel there until this is settled. I'll post guards. You'll be safe." "No." The word came out before Clara had time to think about it. Josiah blinked. "What?" "No. I'm not running." "Clara, this man is dangerous. If he knows you're here, knows who you are." "Then he already knows. Sending me to town won't make me safer. It'll just make me alone." Clara folded the letter, handed it back. "Besides, I'm still angry at you. But I'm not ungrateful. You need help figuring this out. I can help." "How?" Clara thought of her mother facing down landlords and bill collectors with nothing but fierce determination. Thought of herself making it from St. Louis to Texas alone with men chasing her through a blizzard. "I don't know yet, but hiding won't solve anything, and I'm tired of running." Something shifted in Josiah's expression. Surprise, maybe respect. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." That afternoon they gathered in the parlor. Josiah, Clara Thomas Hayes, the foreman, and 3 of Josiah's most trusted men. The letter lay on the table between them like a snake. "Brennan has 20 hired guns," Thomas said. He was sitting in a chair by the fireplace, his weathered hands folded over his walking stick. "We've got 12 men here, and most of them are cowboys, not fighters." "Can we get the sheriff involved?" Clara asked. Thomas snorted. "Sheriff Dawson man's in Brennan's pocket. Has been for years." "What about the federal marshal?" "Nearest one is in El Paso, 3 days' ride, and by the time he got here it'd be over one way or another." Clara looked at the letter again. 48 hours. Not much time. "He wants Josiah to come to Crestwood to sign the papers," she said slowly. which means he expects Josiah to do it, expects him to give in. "I'm not giving in," Josiah said flatly. "I know. But what if we make him think you are? What if we set a trap?" The men looked at her with varying degrees of skepticism. "Keep talking," Josiah said. "Brennan's a businessman, right? He uses lawyers and contracts and legal documents to steal land. That means he keeps records, files, proof of what he's doing. So if we could get those records, take them to the federal marshal, we'd have evidence, real evidence that would stand up in court." Thomas shook his head. "His office is in town, guards outside 24 hours a day. No way to get in." "There might be," said a quiet voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. A young woman stood there, maybe 19, with dark hair and darker eyes. She wore the simple gray dress of a housekeeper. Clara had seen her that morning quietly cleaning the upstairs hallway. The girl had nodded respectfully, but hadn't spoken. "Rosa," Martha said from behind her, surprise in her voice. "What are you doing here? You should be helping in the kitchen." Rosa twisted her hands nervously. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes, but I heard you talking about Mr. Brennan." She glanced at Clara, then at Josiah. "And I have information about my sister." "I heard you talking about Mr. Brennan." Rosa stepped into the room, twisting her hands nervously. "My sister Maria, she works in his house, cleaning, cooking. She hears things." Josiah leaned forward. "What kind of things?" "Plans. Mr. Brennan talks in front of the servants like we're furniture, don't even see us." Rosa's voice was barely above a whisper. "Maria heard him talking 3 days ago about the dam." "What dam?" "He's going to blow up the dam on Willow Creek, make it look like an accident. Then when your ranch is dry and your cattle dying, he'll buy the land for nothing." The room went silent. "When?" Josiah's voice was tight. "Tomorrow night. He's got men in place already." Clara felt sick. This wasn't just about water rights. This was about destruction, ruin. Brennan wanted to break Josiah completely. "Can your sister get the documents?" Clara asked. "The proof of what he's planning?" Rosa nodded. "She knows where he keeps them, in the safe in his office. But there's a problem." "What?" "To get to the safe, she'd need to get past his guards. And Mr. Brennan, he has a man, Garrett, scar down his face. He watches everything. If Maria tried to steal from the safe, he'd catch her. And then—" Rosa didn't finish. She didn't need to. Everyone knew what happened to people who crossed Ezra Brennan. "What if we caused a distraction?" Clara said. "Something big enough that Garrett and the other guards would have to leave their posts." "Like what?" Clara thought for a moment. "Fire." Thomas shook his head. "Too risky. Could spread take out half the town." "A fight then, a brawl, in the saloon across from Brennan's office." Josiah was looking at her now with something like admiration in his eyes. "That could work, if we time it right. Jake and some of the boys could start it, make it big enough that the town constable calls for help. Garrett would have to respond. He's essentially Brennan's head of security. And while everyone's dealing with the brawl," Clara finished, "Maria gets into the office and opens the safe." Rosa bit her lip. "There's still a problem. Maria doesn't know how to open a safe." "I do," Clara said quietly. Every eye in the room turned to her. "I worked in a boarding house where the landlady kept the rent money in a safe. She was old, forgetful, lost the combination twice. I learned to pick it so I could get her the money when she needed it." It wasn't entirely true. Clara had learned to pick the lock because she'd wanted to steal enough to pay for her mother's medicine. She never did it in the end. Couldn't bring herself to. But she'd learned how. Josiah was staring at her. "You want to go into Brennan's office yourself? Maria can get me in, but I'm the one who needs to open the safe." "Yes." "Absolutely not." "Why?" "Because I'm a woman." "Because Brennan threatened you specifically in that letter. He knows who you are, if he catches you in his office." Clara stood, walked to the window. Outside, the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon. Shadows stretched long across the grass. "3 days ago," she said, not turning around, "I was running through the darkness with men chasing me. I made it from St. Louis to Texas alone. I pulled a man twice my size out from under a rock slide. I don't need protecting Josiah. I need to be useful." She turned to face him. "This is my fight now, too. He threatened me, made it personal. I'm going." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Thomas chuckled a dry, wheezing sound. "Boy, you've met your match. I'd say let her go." Josiah looked at Clara for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "All right, but I'm going with you. And if anything goes wrong, you run. You hear me? You get out and you run." Clara nodded, though she had no intention of running if things went bad. She'd done enough running. They spent the rest of the day planning. Jake would take 5 men into town, start the brawl at precisely 8 o'clock. Thomas would position men around Brennan's office building watching for trouble. Josiah would wait in the alley behind the office with horses ready, and Clara would go in through the kitchen entrance with Maria and Rosa while the guards were distracted. As the sun set, Clara stood on the porch watching the sky turn from gold to orange to deep purple. She felt someone approach new. Without looking, it was Josiah. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." "Why?" "You could leave. Right now. I'd give you money, a horse. You could start over somewhere. Brennan doesn't know your name." Clara turned to face him. In the fading light, his features were shadowed, but she could see his eyes. Those gray eyes that had watched her in the cabin with such careful attention. "You asked me earlier what I wanted from you, from the man who wrote those letters. You said a roof and walls. I lied." Clara took a breath. "I wanted to matter, to someone, to anyone. In St. Louis, I was invisible, just another poor girl working herself to death. Nobody saw me. Nobody cared if I lived or died." She looked out at the darkening land. "But in that cabin for 4 days, I mattered. You needed me, my skills, my knowledge, my care. That felt good. Felt like maybe I wasn't worthless after all." "Clara." She held up a hand, stopping him. "I'm still angry at you for lying, still hurt. But I understand why you did it. And tomorrow when we face Brennan, I want to be there. Not because you're protecting me, but because I'm choosing to stand with you." Josiah was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand closed over hers. "You matter," he said. "You've mattered since the moment you decided to save a stranger instead of riding away. You'll matter tomorrow and the day after and every day after that. Whether you're here or gone, whether you forgive me or don't, you matter." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be hard." "Yes." But neither of them moved. They stood there on the porch, hands touching, watching the first stars appear in the vast Texas sky. The next evening came too quickly. Clara dressed in the plainest clothes she could find. A simple brown dress, a dark shawl. She pulled her hair back in a tight bun, tucked it under a bonnet. The goal was to look like a servant, unremarkable and forgettable. Maria and Rosa arrived at dusk. Maria was younger than her sister, barely 16, with frightened eyes and shaking hands. "You don't have to do this," Clara told her, "if you're scared." "I'm terrified," Maria admitted. "But Mr. Brennan is a bad man. He's hurting people. If I can help stop him, I should." Clara squeezed her hand. "Stay close to me. When we get to the office, you keep watch at the door. If anyone comes, you make noise, lots of it. Understand?" Maria nodded. They rode to town in a covered wagon, Clara and the sisters hidden in the back under blankets. Thomas drove, looking for all the world like a ranch hand heading to town for supplies. Josiah and 3 men followed at a distance on horseback. Crestwood was bigger than Clara expected. A real town with a main street, shops, a hotel, 3 saloons. Brennan's office was on the corner of Main and Birch, a 2-story brick building that looked more substantial than anything around it. Thomas dropped them 3 blocks away in the alley behind the general store. Clara, Maria, and Rosa slipped through the shadows, avoiding the pools of lamplight. They reached Brennan's building just as the church bell struck 8. Right on schedule, they heard shouting from the saloon across the street. The sound of breaking glass. Men yelling. Within seconds, people were running toward the commotion, guards included. Clara saw Garrett, the man with the scar, sprint toward the saloon. 2 other guards followed him. "Now," Clara whispered. Maria led them to the back door. She had a key, having made a copy weeks ago at Rosa's urging. The door opened silently. They slipped inside into a dark hallway that smelled of cigar smoke and leather. The office was on the 2nd floor. They climbed the stairs, every creak of the floorboards sounding like thunder in Clara's ears. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure someone would hear it. The office door was locked, but Maria had a key for this too. They entered a large room dominated by a massive desk. Papers were stacked everywhere, maps on the walls, and in the corner a safe, black iron about 3 feet tall. Clara knelt in front of it, pulled out the tools she'd brought. A bent wire, a thin piece of metal. Her hands were shaking. "Calm down," she told herself. "Breathe." She thought of her mother working the lock on the medicine cabinet at the boarding house when the landlady had refused to unlock it. Mama's hands steady and sure. "You can do anything if you don't panic, Clara girl." Clara pressed her ear to the safe, began turning the dial slowly, listening, feeling for the subtle clicks that indicated the tumblers falling into place. 1, 2, 3. The brawl continued outside. She could hear shouting, the sound of the constable's whistle. Good. That meant the distraction was holding. 4, 5. Her fingers cramped. She flexed them, kept working. 6. The last tumbler fell into place. Clara pulled the handle. The safe door swung open. Inside were stacks of papers, deeds, contracts, and a leather journal. Clara pulled it out, opened it to a random page, saw columns of numbers, names of ranches, dates, and detailed notes about sabotage, about men hired to start fires, poison wells, stampede cattle. The dam wasn't the first piece of destruction Brennan had planned. It wasn't even the worst. This was evidence. Real evidence that would send Brennan to prison for years. "Got it," Clara whispered. She stuffed the journal inside her dress, took a few other documents that looked important. That's when they heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy boots, moving fast. Maria's eyes went wide. Rosa grabbed her sister's hand. "The window," Clara hissed. She'd noticed earlier that there was a window leading to a balcony. From the balcony they might be able to climb down or jump to the roof of the adjacent building. They ran to the window. Clara shoved it open just as the office door burst inward. Garrett stood there, scar-livid in the lamplight. His hand was on his gun. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Behind him 2 more men appeared, all of them armed. "Go," Clara told the sisters. "Out the window. Now." "But you—" "Go." Rosa pulled Maria through the window onto the balcony. Clara heard them scrambling down the outside wall. She turned to face Garrett, her mind racing. She needed to buy time, give the sisters time to get away, give Josiah time to realize something was wrong. "Mr. Brennan will be very interested to meet you," Garrett said, stepping into the room. His smile was cold. "You're the woman from Whitmore's place, aren't you? The mail-order bride who never was." Clara backed up until she hit the desk. Her hand found a letter opener. She gripped it behind her back. "Mr. Brennan doesn't like thieves. And I don't like men who threaten women." Garrett laughed. "You've got spirit. That's good. Makes things more interesting." He moved closer. Clara tensed, ready to fight, ready to do whatever she had to do. Then the window behind her exploded inward. Glass shattered. Josiah crashed through, rolled, came up with a gun in his hand. "Step back," Josiah said. His voice was cold as death. Garrett froze. His 2 men reached for their weapons. "Don't," Josiah warned. "I'll put a bullet in your boss's man before you clear leather." For a moment, nobody moved. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Then another voice spoke from the doorway, cultured, amused. "That won't be necessary." Ezra Brennan stepped into the room. He was exactly as Clara had imagined. Mid-40s, immaculately dressed in a suit that cost more than Clara had earned in her entire life. His hair was silver at the temples. His eyes were cold as chips of ice. "Mr. Whitmore, we meet at last in a proper setting." Brennan smiled, And this must be Miss Bennet, even lovelier than I was told. Let her go, Brennan. Your fight's with me. Oh, but she made it her fight when she broke into my office. That's a crime, you know. I could have her arrested, or I could handle it myself out here in the territories where the law is more flexible. Brennan walked to his desk, picked up a cigar, lit it with a match. The smell of tobacco filled the air. However, I'm a reasonable man, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me whatever Miss Bennet took from my safe. Then you're going to sign over the water rights to Willow Creek, and in exchange I won't hurt your lady friend. No, Clara said. Everyone looked at her. I said no, I'm not a bargaining chip, and Josiah isn't signing anything. Brennan's smile faded. Young lady, you don't understand the situation you're in. I understand perfectly. Clara pulled the journal from inside her dress, held it up. This book has records of every illegal thing you've done for the past 5 years. Arson, sabotage, bribery. The federal marshal will be very interested in it. Brennan's face went white, then red. Garrett, take it from her. Garrett moved forward. Josiah's gun tracked him. Take another step and you're dead. The standoff held for a heartbeat. 2, 3. Then chaos erupted. Garrett lunged for Clara. Josiah fired. The bullet caught Garrett in the shoulder, spinning him around. One of the other men drew his gun. Thomas burst through the door behind Brennan, shotgun leveled. Nobody moves, Thomas barked. But Brennan was already moving, diving for his desk drawer where Clara knew he kept a Derringer. She threw the letter opener. It wasn't a good throw, wasn't aimed at anything vital, but it struck his hand. Brennan screamed, jerked back. Josiah was there in 2 strides. He grabbed Brennan, slammed him against the wall. You threatened her, Josiah said. Each word was controlled lethal. You put her name in that letter, made it personal. She's nothing, Brennan spat. Just another whore from St. Louis. Josiah's fist caught him in the jaw. Brennan's head snapped back. He collapsed to the floor, dazed. She's everything, Josiah said quietly, and you'll never say her name again. The sound of running boots filled the hallway. The constable appeared, 2 deputies behind him. He took in the scene, the broken window, the blood, Garrett moaning on the floor, Brennan sitting against the wall holding his bleeding hand and broken jaw. What in the hell happened here? Citizen's arrest, Thomas said calmly. He handed the constable the journal. You'll want to read this, especially the parts about how much Brennan's been paying you to look the other way. The constable's face went pale as he flipped through the pages. This is evidence of felonies, Clara finished. Multiple felonies. And if you don't want to go down with him, I suggest you do your job for once. The constable looked at Brennan, at the journal, at the room full of witnesses. Mr. Brennan, you're under arrest. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Clara sat beside Josiah in the wagon, Thomas driving. Behind them, Jake and the other hands rode in formation, guns ready in case Brennan's remaining men tried something. But no attack came. Word had spread through town about the journal, about what was in it. Men who'd worked for Brennan were already running, trying to get out of the territory before the federal marshal arrived. It was over. At the ranch, Martha had hot food waiting, coffee, bread, the simple comfort of familiar things. Clara ate mechanically, exhaustion settling over her like a blanket. When she finally climbed the stairs to her room, she found Josiah waiting in the hallway. I wanted to make sure you were all right, he said. I'm fine, tired but fine. You were incredible tonight. The way you picked that lock, the way you stood up to Brennan. I've never seen anyone braver. Clara leaned against the doorframe. I was terrified. I know. That's what made it brave. They stood there in the dim hallway, neither quite ready to say good night. Josiah, when you hit Brennan, what you said after. I meant it. He met her eyes. Every word. Clara's throat tightened. I haven't forgiven you yet. For the lying. I know. But I'm willing to try. If you're willing to be patient. I'll be patient as stone, Clara, however long it takes. She reached out, took his hand. Good night, Josiah. Good night. The weeks that followed were strange. Brennan was taken to El Paso to await trial. The federal marshal came, took statements, collected evidence. Other ranchers came forward, told stories of threats and sabotage. The investigation grew larger than anyone had expected. And through it all, Clara stayed at Cottonwood Ranch. She and Josiah circled each other carefully, learning, testing, building something that looked like trust. He taught her to ride properly. She taught him more about herbs and plants, expanding the lessons from the creek. They took walks in the evening, talking about everything and nothing, their pasts, their fears, their hopes. Slowly the anger faded. Slowly something else took its root. 6 months after that night in Brennan's office, Clara stood on the porch watching the sunset. It was spring now, the land coming alive with green and wildflowers. The air smelled of sage and new grass. Josiah came to stand beside her. They'd developed this habit, this evening ritual of watching the day end together. 6 months, Clara said. Yes. You haven't asked me yet. Asked you what? Clara turned to face him, saw the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He knew exactly what she meant. If I'm ready. Are you? She thought about it. Really thought about it. About the scared woman who'd stepped off the train at Thornfield Station, clutching 47 words like a lifeline. About the woman who'd pulled a stranger from under a rock slide. About the woman who'd faced down Brennan in his own office. She wasn't that first woman anymore. She'd changed, grown, found strength she didn't know she had. And Josiah had changed too. The careful, wounded man from the cabin had slowly opened up. Let her in. Shown her the parts of himself he'd kept hidden. Yes, Clara said. I'm ready. Josiah reached into his pocket, pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, simple silver with a small diamond. It was my grandmother's, he said. If you don't like it, we can get something else. I love it. He took her hand, slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Clara Bennett, will you marry me? Not because you need a roof or walls, but because you choose to. Because you want to build something with me. Because despite everything I did wrong, you're willing to give me the chance to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worth your trust. Clara looked at the ring, at the man, at the land stretching away toward the horizon. Yes, she said, on one condition. Anything. You never lie to me again. Ever. Even if you think it's for my own good. Even if you think I can't handle the truth. We trust each other, or we have nothing. I swear it. On everything I have, everything I am. Never again. Clara stepped closer, rested her head against his chest. His arms came around her strong and sure. Then yes, I'll marry you. They stood there on the porch as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. In the distance, cattle lowed. A bird sang its evening song. The land settled into the quiet peace of dusk. My grandmother used to say something, Josiah said quietly. She'd say, Josiah, don't be afraid to love. Fear only makes you lonely. Clara smiled. My mother said something similar. She said trust is like a glass vase, but if you find the right person, they'll hold it carefully. Josiah's arms tightened around her. I'll hold it carefully, I promise. They stood together as the stars began to appear one by one, scattered across the vast Texas sky. Two people who'd been broken finding a way to be whole together. Two people who'd learned that trust wasn't given in a moment, but built day by day, choice by choice. And in that moment, Clara finally understood what home meant. Not a building, not a piece of land, but this. The choice to stand with someone through storms and sunlight alike. The choice to build something lasting. The choice to stay. The wedding took place 3 months later in the late summer when the wildflowers were at their peak. Sarah Miller helped Clara pick flowers for her bouquet. Martha made a dress simple but beautiful white cotton with lace at the collar. Rosa and Maria stood as witnesses along with Thomas and Jake. Reverend Cooper from Crestwood performed the ceremony on the porch of the ranch house with the land stretching out behind them like a promise. When it was over, when they'd said their vows, and Josiah had kissed her to the cheers of the assembled ranch hands and neighbors, Clara looked out at all of it. The house that was now truly hers, the land she'd helped protect, the people who'd become family, and the man beside her whose hand held hers with careful strength. "What are you thinking?" Josiah asked. Clara smiled. "I'm thinking about 47 words." "What about them?" "They brought me here, but they're not why I stayed." "Why did you stay?" Clara turned to face him fully. Behind them the party was starting. Martha was bringing out food. Someone had a fiddle. The sun was warm on her face. "Because you asked me to choose. And I chose this. I chose you. Not the ranch, not the security. You." Josiah's eyes shone. "Best choice I ever made was writing those 47 words. Best choice I ever made was getting on that train." He pulled her close, and they danced their first dance as husband and wife while the sun set over Cottonwood Ranch and the future stretched out before them bright and wide and full of possibility. In the years that followed, Clara would sometimes take out that original letter. The paper grew more fragile with time, the ink more faded. But the words remained clear. 47 words that had changed everything. Not because they were a promise, but because they were an invitation. An invitation to take a chance, to be brave, to choose hope over fear. And Clara had chosen. Would choose again every day for the rest of her life. That was the true story, not of a mail-order bride and a cowboy, but of two broken people who found each other at exactly the right moment and decided that together they could be whole.